Hello guys, today we're going to be doing a video on Spider-Man Remastered using the RTX 3060 Ti. We're going to be starting it off with 1080p on the low preset. These are our settings, and as always, if you like what you see, sub the channel with HyperX as well. We're almost at 1,000 subs. We're getting 120 FPS right now. We're getting a couple of stutters here, nothing too bad. I am running this off an SSD as well, same with the RTX 3080 videos, which should already be up hopefully. And I am running the newest drivers as well, which I forgot to mention in the RTX 3080 video as well. I'm not going to be testing out ray tracing until we get up to the high preset. There's really no need for us to be playing on the low preset. The game looks really good on the low preset. Shadows look kind of bad, but the actual textures look really good. Playing at 1080p, it's a bit pixelated, especially in the distance. But other than that, the game looks good, and it's playing decently well as well. I'll be playing at 1440p. Getting same FPS as before, around 110 to 120 FPS. GPU has pushed up to 80% now, 85%. So obviously 93%. Wow, we actually maxed that now. GPU is almost maxed out. It looks much sharper at 1440p as you would expect. The trees look kind of bad actually at low settings until you get up close. Then it looks decent. But at a distance, it does not look good. So as we increase our settings, we're going to obviously drop down in FPS since we're already maxing out on low settings at 1440p. 4K 60 is going to be the goal. I'll be using DLSS if it does drop below 60. Hopefully it doesn't until high settings. That's my goal. That's my prediction, I guess. Playing at 4K, we're getting 70 to 80 FPS on low settings. So this is not looking good. So we might fall down into the 60s at medium settings. So we might actually have to use DLSS once we get up to the high settings at 4K. This is not a 4K card, this is a 1440p card mainly. Obviously 1080p is going to be very easy for it. 1440p might be a challenge on those higher presets, but should be able to get it done still. And 4K, bit of a challenge for us, I think. Alright, we're playing at 1080p. Let's drop this down real quick. 1080p on the medium preset. We're going to be running into the same issues as we had before. A bit of pixelation in the distance. Game's going to run really well, getting over 100 FPS. We are getting some dips into the 90s, the low 90s, but obviously a single player game, I think 60 FPS here is the real goal. I would not want to play this game at 144. You can if you want, but I would normally target 60 FPS for this type of games. So GPU sitting at 60%, 40% headroom again. Bit weird. CPU sitting at 60% on average. We had some stutters on the low settings at 1080p, but it's not happening as often on the medium settings 1080p, so maybe it settles in after a while. But it was happening far more often on the low settings than it is on medium settings. Alright, playing at 1440p. GPU is going to be fully maxed out, obviously, since it was maxed out on low settings. Actually, I guess not. Some areas we do fall into the 80s still. FPS is in the mid-90s to 100s. As we saw in the 3080 video, some indoor areas are going to be more intensive than the free roam. So ideally you would take away 10 FPS from what you see right here for those more intensive scenes. Alright, playing at 4K. FPS is actually above 60 still, wow. Very nice. We are getting some pop in here. But the game looks fantastic at 4K. It looks super sharp, especially compared to 1080p. There we go. We had the wrong overlay on, and we actually, there we go, we fixed the overlay. We're using up 6 gigs of VRAM, so we only have 2 gigs available to us that's free right now. So using ray tracing or playing at 4K will obviously increase that. So we might run into a VRAM issue at 4K. Playing at 1080p on the higher preset now. Haven't touched any of the settings. We will be trying out ray tracing in this preset as well. Hopefully we can play at 1080p and 1440p at least. I would imagine at 4K we'll run into some issues with the ray tracing, but again, hopefully 1080p and 1440p run well. Alright, let's continue. 1080p. Wow, look at that blur in the distance. That looks really bad at 1080p. It's very obvious at 1080p that it's not running, that it's not looking the best. Even at high settings, it doesn't improve, to be honest. That car just despawned right in front of us. This game is a bit tricky. You can't update the settings on the fly. You gotta actually quit the game and use the launcher to change the settings. When you change the settings while playing the game, or even in the main menu, the game will just freeze up on you. It will completely freeze up. You gotta Alt F4 to actually exit the game and then change the settings in the launcher. It's the first day it's out, so patch will probably fix that up, but it's just a minor issue. Enabling ray tracing at 1080p. We're gonna get 60 FPS here. 70 FPS. Almost 80 FPS. Let's get up close to the cars. These don't look good. The ground looks good. Some areas the cars just don't reflect at all, to be honest. Ground looks amazing though. As you can see, the person is reflecting perfectly. What is going on? Nice camera. Let's go ahead and swing a little bit. Might fall into the 60s at this point. Now, if you actually consider the heavier scenes, minus 10 FPS from this, we're gonna fall into the 50s. So, might want to use DLSS at this point. We're playing at 1080p, so I don't think it's gonna look as good. I'll try it out anyway. I don't know how much of an improvement we can actually get. GPU's sitting at 80% usage anyway, so I don't know if it will actually improve at all. DLSS is not looking that bad at all. It's looking pretty good. But performance is not improved, so not really a point in using it. I'm getting 98 FPS at 1440p. Wow. This is a 1440p card, so I guess I shouldn't be surprised that we're getting this good of an FPS at high preset. GPU is fully maxed out. We're getting 80 to 90 FPS. Really good performance. Oh, the game is feeling way choppier now at 1440p ray tracing. We are falling into the 50s. And the sudden drop in performance just actually ruins the experience a little bit, can't even lie. Like, as I pan the camera, you feel the lag spike. We are sitting in the low 50s now. Go ahead and swing for a little bit. Swinging honestly isn't that bad. We're getting 60 FPS while swinging. But actually walking around, way more stuttery. And we're getting 70 FPS, so gained a 10 FPS. Oh, okay, dropped down to 60 again. Game's running much better though, I gotta say. I'll go ahead and drop down and walk around for a little bit, since that's when we did fall into the 50s. Seems like a good area here. There's so many cars and heaps of people. Would be very intensive for ray tracing to happen. Still getting 60 FPS. Game looks fantastic with DLSS. This looks crazy good. Game feels way choppier now at 4K. 50 FPS for a third-person action game and a single player as well is not that bad at all, but we know how good DLSS looks, so we can always use that. There's really no reason for us not to use it. Oh, that was a very bad diff. Once you fall from 60 or the mid 50s to the low 50s and high 40s, you definitely feel it, and it definitely ruins the experience. 44 FPS is the lowest that I've seen it so far hit. The park here is very intensive. We're getting 41 FPS here. The trees are probably dragging your FPS down right now. We're still gonna fall into the 50s, but we're in the high 50s, so you know, a couple of FPS isn't going to make too much of a difference. DLSS is doing a crazy good job right now. We're sitting at 40 FPS around the park. Now we're holding 60 without any drops. But at quality DLSS 4K ray tracing and high, we are getting 40 FPS. When you pan the camera, you get those massive FPS drops as well. Looking at the park, we're getting 40 FPS. Again, even falling to the high 30s as well. 34 FPS without DLSS. So a 10 FPS increase, pretty much. 5 to 10 FPS increase. Alright, it's 3 AM, so I want to wrap up this video soon. Playing at 1080p, very high settings. I should go ahead and show the settings before we start, in case I've already forgotten. Very high settings. No ray tracing, no DLSS. Getting 100 FPS. With GPU at 85%. Obviously very jumpy, falls into the 70s and then backs up to 90%, but on average we're sitting at 85%. At 1080p, the high preset and very high preset looks very similar to each other. So it actually increased the resolution instead of increasing the presets, because the game looks much sharper at 1440p and 4K compared to 1080p. Using ray tracing at 1080p, we're like sitting at 60 FPS now, so we dropped around 30 to 40 FPS by playing at 1080p. GPU is fully maxed out, but we are holding 60 FPS. Now I'm curious how this runs on the PS5. Pretty sure it runs at 30 FPS with ray tracing. I'm not sure if it runs at 4K with ray tracing or 1080p with ray tracing. Playing at 1440p, very high settings, no ray tracing, we are getting 60 to 70 FPS. So with ray tracing, I'm going to fall below 60 like before. Probably around 40 FPS, I would imagine. It's honestly running quite well. With Dying Light 2, the game was very unoptimized, and it would get 30 FPS, 20 FPS with ray tracing enabled. So even on the PS5 would run it at 1080p with ray tracing. So game was lacking optimization. This is running way better. Wow, once we land, we jump up to 100 FPS. 90 to 110 FPS. But it all depends on the area that you're in. Some areas will be more intensive than other ones. Enabling ray tracing. Getting 80 F. Ooh, I was big stutter there. Getting 50 FPS now. From 85. But swinging, we're getting 60 FPS still. Very impressive for an RTX 3060 Ti. We are getting some dips into the low 50s now. But honestly, it's not that bad. It's getting some stutters here and there. And that's kind of annoying. But normally it's running quite well. Using DLSS, we're getting 65 FPS now. So it's a slight increase. Should be able to hold 60, hopefully. You're looking at the buildings here. Looking real good. We're getting 80 FPS. 70, we're getting 60 to 80 FPS. 4K, very high settings. Game looks so sharp at 4K. It's running very poorly now though. Very stuttery, feels like it's running in slow-mo at this point. We're getting 30 FPS. This park is super intensive. Wow, we're falling into the 20s now. So if you want to play at 4K max settings, you probably want to cap your FPS to 30. For those heavier scenes, you will fall into the 30s and even the 20s sometimes. So, or ideally just play at high settings and you'll have a way better experience as well. Alright, using ray tracing, 4K very high settings, no DLSS, we're getting 28 FPS. 26 FPS. Very choppy at this point, pretty unplayable. Let's go ahead and actually enable DLSS. Set to balanced. And that didn't really improve our performance too much. Sitting at 28 FPS still. So we gained 2 or 3 FPS, I think.
Spider emergency.
Not much of an improvement. Swinging, we're getting 40 FPS. But we do get some dips into the 20s still, so pretty unplayable. Alright, that's it for the video, guys. Hope you enjoyed it, hope you found it useful. If you did, give it a like. And sub to the channel, we highly appreciate it as well. Alright, see you next time.